Welcome to a new episode of Delphines Circle, where we uncover the mind, body, and spirit of success. Subscribe now for free to receive updates on the latest interviews. Then, sit back, relax, and tune in. Hi, Chris. Welcome to the Circle.
Thank you for having me.
Very happy to have you. We have a very accomplished author, journalist, and memoirist to the stars. I've got to tell the story of how we met because it's actually pretty a funny one. I am a bar method devotee. I work out at the bar method. That's my thing. And I have a woman, Carol Abrams, who's worked out next to me for probably 10 years. And she comes in one day. She's like, I've got somebody for your show. And I'm like, oh, God, here we go. Because people are so sweet. They always try to recommend people for the show. And, 90% of the time, it's not really somebody that I would think meets the criteria. So I was like, oh, here we go. And she's like, oh, here it is. And here's his website. And you got to look at this. And I went to his class and he's amazing. And I looked at him. I'm like, she's right. This guy's awesome. So excited to get to meet you.
Well, I appreciate you as well. And I like when serendipity takes over like that because you never know who's going to go forth with something or make a connection. So I'm glad that happened. And thank you.
Well, we have so much to talk about today, but I think I'm going to start at the top with the memoirs because you have an illustrious lineup of people you've done memoirs with, co-wrote memoirs with. Doobie Brothers, professional wrestler Tyrus, Dave Mason, John Oates of Hall & Oates, Phil Collen of Def Leppard, Leif Garrett, Brian Wheat of the band Tesla. My God, man. A lot of work you're putting out there.
I'm trying. I mean, I didn't ever plan on being a memoirist, to use that term, but it's something I fell in love with the form and I really enjoy it. And it's, when people let you into their life like that, it's kind of a big deal. And if you're already a fan or if you follow an artist like that, to be sort of part of their experience is equally interesting for me.
Absolutely. Well, your latest one, or one of your most recent ones, Tyrus, is just blowing up the charts. I mean, it's on the New York Times bestseller list, the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, #1 on Amazon Books.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Why do you think this book specifically is getting so much love?
I think when we were writing the book, Tyrus didn't feel very confident that it would do well. And I said, well, I think it will. But what you have to do is sort of come clean. And I think one thing I've learned in working with people in a memoir capacity is that they have to let go of stuff and really be honest and not be afraid to let people see your bad parts as well as your good parts and how you dealt with that. And his childhood in particular was something he didn't want to go near. And that to me was the most interesting part of his life because he came through a brutal upbringing. And when you write with somebody, there's a very therapeutic aspect to it. I've never been to therapy myself. It's been suggested, but I haven't done it. But what I've learned about it is you do become a bit of a therapist for people. If they can trust you, they're going to tell you things they've never talked about before. And he finally said, all right, we'll try it. We'll see how it feels. And I think that's what's resonating with people. I mean, he has a good platform on Fox News. He can talk about the book a good deal, but that still doesn't explain what's been happening. They can't make enough copies of this book. It's in its third printing as we sit here today in 3 weeks. Which
it was released April 26th. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, Amazon, if you buy it there now, it's like in July, they're saying. So, and right now with COVID, printing has become an issue. There's paper issues and ink issues. So it's hard for publishers to go out and get like another 50,000 books. But his book has touched a nerve with people. And not just the book, but like the ebook, the audio book. People want this. They're buying multiple copies to give as gifts. And I think a lot of it is, again, because he decided to really come clean and share things that he'd never talked about before.
How much time did you spend with him on the creation of the book?
About a year.
Wow.
It's usually, these things can take longer than that, but a year is a good starting point to really get to know somebody and to break through, break down certain walls and things and get to the heart.
Did you know him before you partnered
No,
with him?
it was actually, I didn't see this one coming.
You're not a WWE fan?
Not even a little bit. I knew Tyrus, I knew him from his TV commentating, but a publisher friend reached out about 1.5 years ago and said, look, we have an emergency. We've acquired this book, but Tyrus's co-writer bottomed out. He didn't deliver. Tyrus is really upset. There's a schedule. It's got to get done. He's going to interview 3 or 4 writers. Do you want to be one of them? And I said, sure. And he and I had a phone call that I thought went pretty well. And then he called me a day or so later and he goes, you know what, man, I feel good about you. Do you want to do this with me? And so we took the leap. And so it wasn't something I was out looking for. It just sort of fell into my lap. But we hit the ground running, and we're a weird match. I mean, we don't have a lot in common. You know, he's 6'8", 375 pounds.
6'8"?
Oh yeah, he's a
Oh my gosh.
big guy, but very gentle. I mean, he really has a lot of different. He's a very complicated guy, as I learned early, and we became really good friends, which is good when that happens. It's good to have a personal chemistry when you write a book
Where
like
does
that
he live?
together. He lives outside of outside of New Orleans, but he flies to New York every 3 or 4 days to work at Fox. So he's back and forth a lot.
Yeah, fun. Another brand new release is Long Train Running, from memoir for the Doobie Brothers.
Yeah, that's written with Pat Simmons and Tom Johnston, who are the two founding members of the band.
So what was it like working with them?
Amazing. I mean, I got to know Pat a little bit. I had written an article as a journalist about his wife, who is a motorcycle enthusiast, as is Pat. And she was riding this kind of epic marathon, antique bikes, like 1920s motorcycles. And they were in Carlsbad, and I met her there to write this piece about her. And Pat was there. And we all had dinner that night. And he was telling stories. And she said, you guys should work on Pat's book together. And I said, I would love to. And we started talking about it. And then I thought, I went to see the band a number of times. And I grew up like a huge Doobie Brothers fan. And Tom Johnston, I thought, would be interesting if you get them two together, because there were some tensions that existed between them that went back a long way. And I thought, well, you want conflict, right? So that's good. And I just thought from a commercial standpoint, a Doobie Brothers book with two founders would be more powerful and a better way for them to tell their story.
So true.
So we met, the three of us, a few times and figured out what it would look like. What I didn't take into account.
So is this Tom Johnson right
here?
No,
that's Pat and Tom. Pat. Right.
Pat and Tom. Okay.
And
gorgeous book cover too, by the way.
Yeah, St. Martin's Press hit it out of the park. So one thing I didn't consider was that's like writing two books, because it's two people, and to interweave them with Michael McDonald and some other voices as well, it was a lot more work, because you're writing two distinctly separate stories and figuring out how to fuse them together. So it was good. I mean, I figured I kind of cracked the code on that.
Yeah.
So I could do it again if I had to with two people. And I think I know how to approach it now. So from a learning curve standpoint, that was good for me as well. And
so do you write, do you try to, they obviously have two different perspectives, right? For every story, there's, 7 different perspectives.
Yeah.
So how do you meld the two if their recounts are very different?
Well, that's okay. I think you want a little bit of that, because, I mean, if you and I walked out today and witnessed like a car accident or something, depending on where we're standing, our truth may not line up, right? You see what you see from your angle, and it's like that. So it's all relevant. It's just where you're standing, what your position is in something, how you see it is going to determine how you tell the story. So I'm okay with that. They don't have to match up necessarily.
Would you get them in the same room to talk about things, or they were always individual interviews?
Always individual. Okay. We met a couple of times early, but no, as far as the real deep dives and interviews, it was always separate.
Yeah. So were you happy with the way, when you closed the book, where you're saying we nailed it, we're super happy with the way we did it?
I mean, I was, but then when you get the book, there are always things that it's never finished. You always want to add things, and which you can do later. Typically what happens in publishing is a year after the hardback comes out, a paperback comes out, and that's an opportunity to add some additional content or flesh it out a bit more. So you can do that. But yeah, I was totally happy, and they were happy, and that's what really matters to me.
So it sounds like you find your artists all different ways, right? There's not just one way. It's not like your agent's going on this person, this person.
Not at all. It's all very organic. Like with John Oates, for instance, I had written a number of pieces about him. He and I became friends through that. I mean, we really had a good chemistry. And I brought it up one day writing a book, and he said, no, I don't think I'd ever be interested. He goes, why? And I said, well, I had sort of a thought of how we could do it. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, well, you don't want to do your book, so I'm not going to. He goes, everyone tell me. Right. So I described to him what the process could be with him, because he's a writer. He was a journalism major and all that. And I kind of laid out for him, and he goes, you know what? I would do that. That process is interesting. And that's how we got there. So it's always different how you get to it. And no two are even remotely alike.
It sounds like people have some concerns going into it, huh?
Always.
It's very, what are they worried about, do you think?
to me, the ultimate of that was I found myself once enviably in Stevie Nicks' closet with her, right? And I had done an interview with her at her house, and the whole crew was videotaped, and the whole crew left. And she was like, and I adore Stevie Nicks, like from way back.
Who
Like,
doesn't love Stevie
right.
Nicks?
And she said, she was like the woman at home who didn't have a lot of company, right? And she goes, well, can you hang out for a little bit? And I'm like, of course. So this goes late into the night, and we end up, she has this big walk-in closet, and there was artwork she wanted to show me, but she wasn't tall enough to reach it. So while we're in there, I said, you know what, we're talking. I said, have you ever thought about, your story? And she says, you know what? She goes, I would love to do it. She goes, but I'd have to wait till I'm 90 years old because everybody involved would have to be dead. She said, because if they weren't, she said, I'd never forget, she goes, empires would crumble. If, and so people definitely have concerns about what they're going to do. And, you have to look at it as well. People that lived these lives in the 70s, now they have kids and in some cases grandkids, and they're reticent to go too deep on things because they don't want all of that out in the open. And I get that. But sometimes there's ways to hint at it or at least reflect some of what the lifestyle was without being too graphic.
So when you were working with John Oates, obviously he's part of a famous duo, right? Mm-hmm. Did you interview Daryl Hall for this at all? Was that part of the process?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was on the road with them a lot. So, because a lot of times artists, it's a good time to work. There's a lot of downtime. So I saw them.
I saw Almost Famous.
Yeah, well, so I probably saw them play 50 times in that time we're working on the book. So Daryl, you get to know him a bit, but Daryl's a much different person. I think that duo works because they're so different. John's it's like fire and ice, and John's the fire. He's the passionate Italian, and Daryl's more aloof, and that's what creates their conflict. But Daryl, to that end, John would share with him parts of the book, and he had great comments and remembered certain things. He definitely played a part in it, but it's very much John's story, and I'm really proud of that book. And again, John as a writer is really good, and so we would each write pieces and then trade and critique each other's work. It became a very seamless, collaborative process. So that's been my kind of, in terms of process, my favorite one.
I love it. That's awesome. Well, I know you have a master class where you teach people how to write memoirs.
Yeah.
So that you must have this down to a science by now.
Well, just when you think you do, you realize you know nothing. You know what I mean? Because every group is different and everybody brings different baggage. I had a group last night and it's about 25 people and they're incredible. This particular group right now is so engaged and so willing to cut loose with stuff, and share things that they've never shared.
So is this them writing their own memoir?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so, but I'm sort of there as like a story coach and kind of getting them in the mood to get up and to read things and do things publicly in the room and all that. And yes, I learn as much as they do about the process just by watching them find their voice. I like that. I like watching people discover their voice. You think you know what it is, but until you really tap into what makes yourself tick and get up and speak about it publicly, then you see people grow like right in front of your eyes. Wow. These revelations that you see. So that's been a real fun part. So you don't really know. I think I kind of have it down, but then someone told a story last night and it's like, my God, I never would have imagined anybody getting up and sharing what they did. And if you can at least create the environment that they feel they can do that, that's what I feel my role becomes. It's just letting them know the space is private. There's an intimacy to those kinds of groups. Nothing leaves that room. And people like the idea, I think, of having a support system like that. So whether they end up writing a book or not almost is irrelevant. It's more about finding their voice and becoming comfortable with their past and owning their past, confronting pain and truth and all that. Some write. There'll be people that will come in like there's a lawyer in there. He doesn't want to write a book, but he said, you know what? My job as a trial lawyer is to be a storyteller. I need to be a better storyteller. Wow. So he's in there just to master that. So everyone's got their own. There's a realtor, same thing. And he's like, you know what? I sell dreams to people, but the story is very important. So I'm here to kind of learn that. So everyone comes at it with a different motive.
Interesting. So is there a formula that you approach when you're teaching somebody how to write their own memoir as opposed to the way you would approach writing somebody else's memoir?
Not really. I mean, to me, it's like, I plan a workshop the way I plan like a trip. I'll map out about 75% of it and leave 25% to chance and just keep that open. So there's definitely things that you want to walk people through and have them make certain lists and do all that. But honestly, things just come up sometimes in the moment in real time that you don't plan on, but that are really valuable to reflect on or react to. So I have people that have taken that workshop for 7 years that have never left because they get something different out of it every time because the people change around them and they're always discovering things. So I always kind of look at them and think, am I being redundant with them? So they're the ones that make me want to keep it fresh. Those people the diehards who never go away.
That's so cool. That's awesome. You got to command performance, man.
Well, it's like therapy for them.
Yeah.
For a lot of people, they just like that idea of documenting their life, but also
hearing the other stories.
Yeah, hearing other people's, what they've gone through and different things they've experienced.
So when you write, do you try to write, very subjectively to just that person's voice? Do you try to be more objective? I mean, how do you bridge that kind of creative?
It depends on the person you're working with. With Tyrus, for instance, Tyrus is a very nuts and bolts storyteller. It's very linear. It's very raw. It doesn't require a lot of fictionalizing. It is what it is. John Oates was different. John's a very passionate writer. And there were things that, there was one instance in particular where there'd been an event I had read about. He didn't really recall it, but I felt it was integral to the story. And I said, can I write it almost like a piece of fiction and see how it feels? Because memoir, it's creative nonfiction. You can take some liberties. You can't make stuff up, but you can embellish things creatively that serve the story. So he said, go for it. And I wrote this scene from his experience when something had happened with he and Daryl. And he read it and he goes, you know what? He goes, I wouldn't change a word of that. He goes, because that feels like I would have felt it. So in his case, there were lots of opportunities to write from a very creative standpoint. Doobie Brothers was kind of in the middle. They have obviously great stories that line up and you can fact check and all that. But there were also some things about band relationships and some tragedies that happened that we took a little bit of liberty in terms of dramatization and stuff, but it's still all accurate.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So you've worked with somebody. Tell me another fun story about somebody you've worked with.
Leif Garrett was somebody, he and I are the exact same age.
Leif Garrett. Oh,
right.
Swoon.
And I was in the late 70s. I was not a Leif Garrett fan. I was into the Rolling Stones and the Sex Pistols, and but I never forget. There was one night in 1978. I was at a party and wandered into this room. And the TV was on, and on came Leif Garrett's. He was the youngest guy to ever have his own variety show, and his guests were like Bob Hope and Flip Wilson. It was real 70s. But we watched it sort of ironically, kind of goofing on Leif Garrett. But I remember that night thinking, you know what? He's really smart. He's really funny. And he's kind of in on this joke of being a teen idol. Yeah. That was my take on him. And the fact that we're the same age as life went on, I always kind of noticed when things would happen to him in the paper, all of his drug issues, I thought were really sad. Because here had been this sort of bright light, that all of a sudden was this heroin-addled guy who's being, dragged into court and all this. So it was always on my radar as a story. And I reached out on a whim a number of years ago to his publicist. And I said, look, he had gotten out of jail again. And I said, for what it's worth, and I kind of wrote a pitch letter, of why I felt like if he wasn't working on his story, I might be a good fit. And it was politely declined by his publicist and all. But a year or two later, she called me and she goes, you know what? He wants to write a book and we saved your letter. And what you wrote really affected him. Like the way you would approach it meant something to him and he'd like to meet you. So I said, great. So he and I met, we connected. I went to his house up in where he lives in Topanga Canyon, kind of end of the road. You can't find it. Your GPS will not locate it. And we met there at this little compound. He made breakfast and he and I just became instant best friends, But the story is one night we had gone to a show at the Palladium in Hollywood. And, we got there early, so we went to get something to eat before. And Leif, there wasn't a homeless person. There's a lot of them on Sunset Boulevard. Leif could never pass one without having some sort of interaction. He has this real connection to people who are down on their luck because he's been through a lot of stuff. So you have to build in like an extra half hour. And Leif would talk and give a couple of bucks. And it's like, then we go eat. And then coming back, he's doing the same thing. I'm like, man, the show's going to start, And there's one guy on the street corner. He's not a homeless guy. He's a young Black guy who's hustling like he's a singer or a rapper. And he's got a CD, right? And he's trying to get people engaged. And Leif takes one, gives him a couple of bucks. And the guy says to Leif, he goes, man, you got to listen to that. You got to promise. And Leif goes, dude, I'll play it on the way home in my car. I promise. And the guy says to him, he goes, you'll see, man, every little girl around the country is going to want my picture on their bedroom wall. Every little girl.
Does he know who Leif Garrett is at the time?
Not even a clue. And Leif's listening, and the guy's going on and on about every little girl, my picture, not knowing that this is a guy that girls all over the world have his picture.
Yeah.
And Leif stops him, and he says, look, man, I got to tell you one thing. He goes, it's great that you're making music. He goes, but don't worry. He goes, you don't know me, but trust me. Don't worry about being on young girls' walls. Worry about the music. I can tell you firsthand, your interest should be in making good music and not that stuff. That stuff will come if you're good. Because Leif didn't have a chance to, he was so manipulated. He never made his own music. And that moment for me, as we were walking, I said, you know what, man, I want to write an essay in the back of the book about that. Because that's your essence right there. That you didn't tell him who you were. You didn't have to do that. But you gave him advice. You gave him something very heartfelt and very valuable. So that's how the book ends.
Oh my gosh, love it. Well, I, like many of the people in my age group, was a huge Leif Garrett fan. Yeah. So it's interesting to see like kind of what happens when it comes full circle, right? Everybody's interested in that story of like what happened, because he kind of just dropped off the scene. And
I'm really proud of that book because we got into what happened. And Leif was really good about going into some things he had never talked about. And it's a real, but when we first talked, he says, well, how do you see the book? And I said, well, it's an addiction memoir. And he kind of rolled his eyes. And I said, no, not like you're thinking, not your addiction. I said, to me, it's how everybody became addicted to you. It's like you were the drug. And if we look at it like that, we can get to the other stuff. But I really look at this as something that you were the commodity that people became addicted to. And that's what really hurt you, And he says, well, because that's a different kind of approach. Yeah. I think we can do something with that. Very so that was the theme of the book.
Another one of the books, Rock and Roll in OC. I got to read a little bit about that. Sounds fascinating. I love this kind of stuff. Tell us, what was the impetus for writing that book and a couple of the highlights?
I just have always, since I moved to Orange County in 1999, have been aware of the fact that I never thought that Orange County got its cultural due for all the impacts of things that have happened here. It's sort of like LA's stepsister. So I made it my business to write a number of books that help, create awareness and celebrate the history. And I'm a big music fan, so that was a no-brainer to write about the music history. Starting with, Rickenbacker guitars being based in Orange County, Fender, of course, the Leo Fender story, the Righteous Brothers and all that, all the great punk rock history. There's a lot that happened here, but the one story to me that is just amazing is that in late 60s, early 70s, Elvis Presley leaves Graceland to live, more full-time in Southern California. And Priscilla, his wife, wants to bring their horses out. She's a horse person. And he says, well, fine, but you need to deal with them. So she boards them in Huntington Beach off of Golden West at the Equestrian Center. So Lisa Marie learns to ride horses there. And so Elvis, they're in Huntington Beach, from time to time. Same time period, Elvis gets into martial arts, right? And he commissions a guy named Mike Stone, who at that point was really the guy who was introducing martial arts into American culture in the early 70s. He has a studio in Westminster. And Mike Stone says, look, I'd love to teach you, but you can't come to my studio. Come to my home in Huntington Beach. So every week, Elvis is going off of Edwards to Mike Stone's house. And I interviewed for the book the kids that lived there on that cul-de-sac, who each week would see a white stretch limo pull up with Elvis, who would have albums that he would sign to the kids to say, look, you keep this quiet, take care of me, I'll take care of you, right? So he, I guess, becomes a black belt through Mike Stone. And he encourages his wife, Priscilla. He says, hey, this guy's amazing. Go take classes there. She does while he's on tour. Well, subsequently, they fall in love. And she leaves Elvis for Mike Stone. So that's an Orange County story, So there are a lot of things like that that I think a lot of people aren't aware of. And it was a really fun book to write. I mean, there was a famous club in Huntington Beach as well called the Golden Bear.
One of our other guests tells a story about the Golden Bear. He met his wife there, Steve Wood, who's a big what do you call it, film composer, and he met his wife there, and she was the backup singer for Linda Ronstadt.
Well, okay, so, and Linda Ronstadt, she performed at Disneyland in 1971. Her backup band ended up becoming the Eagles. Again, another Orange County story. The Eagles born in Orange County. But the Golden Bear, there was a young local surfer there who wanted to be a muralist. And the owner of the Golden Bear in 1979 said to him, look, I can't pay you. I don't have money to pay you, but if you paint the side of our building, I'll never charge you for another show. And that was one of Weiland's first murals.
Oh, wow.
Funny. So
another Delphines Circle guest.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to bring it up with some Laguna history there as well. So again, I'm very proud of that music book. There are great stories and just great tales of excess and things that took place in Orange County in regards to rock and roll.
You have so many. I have a feeling we could talk for hours and hours. I love your stories. Another thing we have in common is our background in advertising. Yours was a little more illustrious than mine, but you were the creative director for a number of LA and Orange County-based agencies. You created hundreds of campaigns, wrote thousands of commercials, won lots of awards. So what made you make that decision to leave the world of advertising, which you were clearly very successful in, and make the move to being a full-time writer?
I was getting a little frustrated with the fact that when you write a lot of commercials and stuff, nobody knows you've done it. Like there's no credits at the end of a commercial. So
just wanted your name on something.
Well, you want some creative recognition and satisfaction. And I was also getting a little tired of the business. And I figured that there were books I wanted to write. Ever since I was a little kid, I wanted to be an author. That was always my goal. And I was doing some freelance writing and articles and things like that. But I decided to take a year and leave. I had a client who came with me and said, look, we'll be your client for a year, service us, write the commercials and all that. And then I took that year to go off and write proposals for 2 books that I always wanted to write. And I figured that would be, if it worked, it would work. And if it didn't, then I would just go back to advertising. And both of those books sold. So, and came out on the same day, ultimately a year later, which was crazy to have the 2 books you always wanted to write come out literally the same day, 2 different publishers. So that was really the impetus for it. And
what were those 2 books?
One was called Roadside Baseball, which was a cross-country journey to discover baseball history.
Because you're a big baseball fan.
Yeah, I am. And the other one was a book called James Dean Died Here, which was a travel book, an offbeat travel book that explored places that you might pass every day and not know what took place there, And I was inspired when I was a kid in New York. I read an article like 9 years old that showed Marilyn Monroe with her dress billowing up in the 7-year itch and talked about the fact that that subway grating where she stood was real at 52nd Street, Lexington Avenue. So I went there as a kid and found it. And I thought, how cool is this that I know, nobody else walking over it knows, but I know what happened there.
And so there's no plaque or anything?
No. But I wanted to like shoo people off of it as a kid. Like, this is sacred ground. So James Dean Died Here is about 600 of those places.
600?
The first book was.
Oh my gosh.
And NPR made it their book of the summer. And I would go on NPR every week and kind of lay out weird little road trips for people. And that's where I got into that whole travel writing thing. I wrote about 4 or 5 sequels to that book that just got deeper and weirder and more obscure, but all about places that you might pass every day, a bit of sidewalk or a yard or something and not know what happened there. And I became like that person. I did a lot of TV work, exploring those places, and it was really fun. And I still do some of that, but that was really what made me realize that I can do this. I can do this full time and chase these passions and write about, but you should write about what you're passionate about. So for me, it was travel and baseball history and things like that. And so I devoted a lot of time to that.
I love it. Now, did you take your kids on road trips down to see
God.
all those? They're like, Dad, not again.
Yeah, my kids grew up doing a ton of that. And then for about 10 years, I was a spokesman for a thing called Save a Landmark, where we would travel the country and we saved landmarks in all 50 states. So that was a lot of travel. They would come along and be part of the refurbishment projects on historic buildings and things like that. So yeah, there was a lot of history in the house growing up. And I think it was great. I think they had a great time with those travels. We covered a lot of miles and I wouldn't trade a second of it.
Yeah, well, and you had articles published in Los Angeles Times, Westway.
What's funny is I had pitched all those places years before, and you'd either get rejected or you wouldn't hear back. And when James Dean Died Here came out, the publisher of Westways called me and he goes, "Hey, have you ever thought about maybe writing for us?" And I said, "I have like 20 rejections." But
Have I thought about it?
when you write books, it changes. All of a sudden, there's a cachet to that. And then I was able to write for a lot of places. And I had a weekly column, LA Times for 8 years. So yeah, I wrote a lot, but it was because of the books that lended a lot of credence and credibility.
So was it the actual going to the place and immersing yourself? Because, they always say it's a way to write off vacations, right? Was it the actual travel there, or is it more of the history part? Because you seem like you're a real history buff.
It's both. And it's the journey going there too. That became really much about thinking about how you make those miles count getting there. But it's the history, it's the chance to tell a story that either hasn't been told, or if it's been told, not from the perspective that I would want to come at it. That was always my two criteria. Is it completely original, or can I bring something to it that hasn't been known before?
Yeah. What's the most unique place that you've traveled to and written about?
God, that's a good question. I mean, there are literally thousands. I mean, I will say the site where James Dean died to this day fascinates me because it's still a speck in the road that's in the middle of nowhere.
But there is a sign, right, that says that.
Well, what happened was my book came out and that generated a lot of interest in that site, right? And on the 50th anniversary of Dean's death, which was, I think, in 2005, I went along NPR. I went out with them and we did like an hour by hour drive to the site where I narrated his last day alive. And that day they unveiled a sign there. It's now called the James Dean Memorial Junction. It's like, it's a crash site. Right. But that site to me is fascinating because that's really, in my view anyhow, where American pop culture was sort of born in a sense. Because people forget, he only had one movie out when he was killed. He was not a big movie star, one film. But what really made it crazy was that Rebel Without a Cause came out less than a week after he was killed. So it was that's what made him this like forever anti-hero, And
what city is that in?
Technically, it's called Shalom. It's between Bakersfield and Paso Robles.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
Oh, it is. Even today, that's the other part too. It looks pretty much exactly like it did. Right. A lot of places I would visit have changed over the years, But that one for me is still very haunting and still very significant. And whenever I drive past it today, I always kind of pause and think. For me, in a lot of ways, my career as that kind of writer was born at that site, because that's where I felt something powerful at that site. And it inspired me to go find lots of sites like it.
I love that. Well, I am a huge fan of Anthony Bourdain. I don't know I think there's so many people that are a huge fan. Was he probably, obviously, the most famous travel writer we've probably ever had in history? What was your thoughts about Anthony Bourdain, or how is
I loved him.
Yeah.
I mean, I still do. I just recently watched a documentary about his life.
Oh my God, wasn't it great?
It was wonderful.
Oh, I highly recommend everybody watch that documentary.
But his passion and his sort of innate emotional connections to things and his curiosity, that's really the driving force. Yeah. Any books like that, any shows like that, if you don't have off-the-chart curiosity about life and people and food and all that, it's not going to feel authentic, and it's not going to make people want to go along with you on that journey. And I think that was really what made him so special, is we wanted to be with him. He was so charismatic and so compelling that you wanted to feel, and he kind of made you feel that. Yeah. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't really polished. It was just sort of like...
He's very authentic.
Very.
I loved that the documentary really kind of highlighted, because when they first went out there, they were like, oh, what have we gotten ourselves into? He's not very good at this.
I know. And then they realized, but that's what it was. That's what made him special, was the authenticity. So I remain a big fan of his.
Yay. All right, so we do a little something called Big Questions here. It's your opportunity to be authentic. Do you have any consistent daily routines?
I mean, the one that's in the last year or so that for me has become special and something I really look forward to is I live by the beach now, and I always liked sea glass as a kid, right? And as I get older, sea glass, the remnants that you find, to me became more important because I realized those are pieces of history. You know what I mean? You don't know where that piece of polished glass may have come from. It may have been part of, a Marilyn Monroe medicine bottle. I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
So I get up at the 5 o'clock every morning, check the tide. And I go out and I spend an hour or two walking and wandering and collecting sea glass.
Oh my
And that's
gosh.
my sort of time to meditate, to pray, to think about what I need to do that day, clear out every kind of thought process in that moment. The weather affects it, what the weather's like in the morning. It's very quiet. You won't pass another person. And that for me has become
And it's grounding, walking in the sand.
oh God, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
And also the search, I had this sort of, my son was a paleontology student. And so he and I went on dozens of fossil digs around the country. And so you really became trained to looking for little anomalies and things that were not right with the ground, because it may have been tip of the iceberg, a dinosaur fossil or something. And this is kind of like that. It really trains you to focus and look for color and texture. And also that's become a new routine for me. I also read a lot. I mean, I'm a voracious reader, and there's no day that goes by that I'm not reading at least 2 or 3 books in and out.
Oh
And that's,
my gosh.
yeah, and that's
Wow.
it's how I go to sleep each night. So it's absolutely a routine that keeps me grounded. But the sea glass has become something I really like, and I've just got bowls of it now. I need to think about what to do with it.
Yeah, I was about
but
to
each
ask.
piece, I always think about where did this come from? Is it 30 years old? Is it 50 years old? What's the origin of this piece? And I'm going to start using it in a memoir writing class, because if you give people a piece of sea glass and have them write a fictional story about where it may have come from, I think that helps unlock certain things in your brain and your mind and your heart and everything. So
I love it. Well, that probably could be the answer to number 2 is tell me something people would be surprised to know about you.
that might be. I mean, I think people that know me well, they know how much music means to me, right? And this might sound like not a big deal, but to people who know that I'm very passionate, I've written a lot about music, thousands of articles and things. I'm not a really big Beatles fan on any level.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think the reason why is when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I had this sort of lightning bolt moment with the Rolling Stones. And I absolutely became completely entranced by that band. I still am.
And you felt like you had to pick sides?
Well, back then that was sort of like, it was Beatles or the Stones. That was sort of like Ginger and Marianne. Like that was a thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I think the other part was that when the Beatles broke up when I was probably in 4th grade. So I didn't have a chance to experience them in real time, whereas the Rolling Stones throughout the 70s was very much part of my life. They would have a new album came out and I got to live it in real time. They were still an active band, So I know how good they are. I get all of that, but I'm not really a fan, And I know that if you love music, I know they probably wouldn't be friends with me anymore.
Yeah.
They may see that now. But it just doesn't, again, I understand them. I get the importance. I get that the songs are great, but I can never envision putting on a Beatle record at home or in my car, like ever.
Interesting.
So,
yeah. I'll try to still be friends with you.
I know.
We did name our son Julian. It's not a coincidence, FYI. Tell me, what do you think is the purpose of life?
I went back because this was a question that you thankfully sort of give a couple of days before. And, I wish if I knew that, I would write a book about it and retire, right? If I could tell you.
Tanya knows. We're going to talk about it next, so you can stick around.
But I do think everybody has their own purpose. I think it comes down to that. Look, there's obvious basics. I'd love to believe that people believe in living and let living, and that, that they do unto others, basic golden rule stuff, and that you leave the world a better place than you found it. I hope that's part of someone's purpose. For me personally, my personal purpose is being a father. That's the one thing I feel semi-decent at, that I feel like that my skill set is a good fit for that. You know what I mean? And that's the one thing for my purpose that I feel that's why I'm here. And if I did nothing else, that's the only thing I really care about.
Oh, wow. I like that answer. Very cool.
It's all I got.
It's all you got. What's a piece of advice that you were given that has served you well?
I remember I had the benefit of, when I was a kid, we had a neighbor who was a very well-known author in New York. And I had a teacher, a 4th grade teacher, who recognized that I loved writing. And she told my parents. And when I heard that, I decided I wanted to be a writer because I loved this teacher. I thought if she said that, then, and I said to my parents, I want to be a writer. So they suggested I write this writer, John Cheever, a literary lion. I write him a little letter as a kid, and he answers me and invites me over, and thus develops this multi-year mentorship with John
How
Cheever.
wonderful is that? What did he write?
The short stories of John Cheever are probably his most well thought of book.
Okay.
Great novels, The Wapshot Chronicle, Falconer. But I mean, when I was a kid going there, John Updike would be there. There were like literary salons in his house that I would get to observe as a kid. But I never knew who he was, so I wasn't a pain in the neck. I would just sort of sit and listen. But in high school, he was on the cover of Newsweek magazine, and that I brought the magazine there that day, and I like put it down and I said, "You're John Cheever," like. And that was sort of a change where I really appreciated who he was. But way back when, he told me, he said, "You're going to get a lot of advice in your life." He goes, "I would encourage you to always look at the source of the advice." He goes, "'Cause in some cases, you want to do the exact opposite of that advice if the person is either not trustworthy or legitimate." He says, "So always don't," he goes, "It's good people will give you advice, but always be aware that you have to look at who's giving it to you." And I've never forgotten that.
Yeah.
When I get advice, I do think about that first.
It's great advice, right? What do you think is the most pressing issue facing our world these days?
Right now, as we sit here, there's a lot. Where do you even begin?
Right.
The one thing I get back to a lot is I think social media has created kind of a desensitizing of people emotionally. It's stopped a lot of interpersonal, face-to-face communications, which I think is awful. I think for a lot of young people that define themselves based on their social media personas, that's created a lot of confusion. And so I think it's forced us into our own personal bubbles, and I think created a lot of God complexes for people. So I think that's been a big issue, kind of on a macro level. I think social media, as great as it is on certain levels, I think it's also changed behavior in a way that's a little bit dangerous,
Yeah, we're hearing a lot of that.
So, but there's others too. I mean, there's a lot of concerns today, but that one for me, I don't know how you control it. It's because it's not even young people; it's all of us, people my age, your age. If you're not careful with it, it really does affect how you relate to people. And that's why I think it's important you get out. And
are you on social media?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I love it from a promotional standpoint.
Right.
You can share stories and insights and things like that. And I think
specifically how it's affecting the younger generation.
Yeah, and I think the anonymity of it's bad as well. I think people that use it as just a platform to attack without putting their name on it. Like, I wish that your name had to be on everything. I wish there was only a way to do that and erase the anonymity. Because when you're anonymous, you can get away with verbal murder if you want to, and you can do things that you would never do in person. You would never say to somebody's face, but behind the wall of a pseudonym, you can do that. And so I'm not crazy about that.
Yeah. It's interesting. One of our last writers, Rick Reef, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, and he said he thought the biggest concern was freedom of speech is being compromised. And at the time he said it, I was like, is that the biggest issue? And then 2 shows later, we got shut down because we had a medical ethics conversation with an attorney and a doctor talking about the medical ethics of forced mandates for kids vaccines. And we literally got taken off of YouTube within 24 hours of voicing it. And it was an intellectual conversation, and it was really about freedom of choice, not forcing it. So all of a sudden that's become much higher on my list. I was like, damn, that's not okay.
No, but I get it. And to that end, one other thing I would say that really concerns me, it's countries like communist China that take freedom of expression and pulverize it. And there are human rights abuses that we'll never even know about. But a lot of them have to do with shutting down someone's right to express themselves. And when you do, whether you're a doctor that may have called out the true origins of COVID, you're jailed, or worse, you don't even know. And I think that's a huge issue. I think when you look at certain governments today and how they suppress not just free speech, but free thought, that's obviously a much bigger concern than anything else.
Yeah, I agree. Tell me something you used to believe, but you don't anymore.
I used to, for a long time, when it came to politics, would have really intense debates about term limits. And I believed there shouldn't be any. I thought if you can get elected, then do it. There should be no. And I've completely changed my mind on that, because I think as you get older, I hate the idea of career politicians. And I think that what I used to think about, well, if you can get elected, that didn't take into account that the longer you're in office, the more connections and apparatus you have to sort of work around things in a way that non-incumbents don't have the ability to do. And I'm just really tired of looking at both sides, Republican and Democrat, with people in their late 70s and 80s that still wield all this power at a time where, look, I know my mom was 85 when she passed. Was it sharp and lucid? But there were still issues, just physical things. And I think the pressure we put on politicians today that are that age, I think it's inappropriate to expect people with that amount of power to deliver on what they need to deliver for people. So one thing I've changed is I'm firmly in favor of term limits today and against career politicians. I think you need a constant influx of fresh blood and youth and new ideas and opinions.
Yeah, I agree with that. You don't just stop at writing. You are an on-air talent as well. You have created and hosted a show called It Happened Here on Reel's channel. I actually tried to find it, but it's not quite available on Cox yet, which I was very disappointed to know about. But tell us a little bit about what that show's about.
That for me was a real wonderful project because it was based on James Dean Died Here and that series of books. And this whole idea of geographic history, if you wanted to retrace history by going in the footsteps of events, and that's what it's all about. So we did 10 episodes and we would take a life like Andy Warhol or Janis Joplin or Richard Pryor and break down that episode based on their life, where they first did this, where they first did that, where they met, where John Lennon met Paul McCartney at a church in England.
So do you go to the location as you're talking about this?
In some cases, yeah. I mean, we're all, the thing was literally all over the map. And I'm kind of the narrative thread throughout telling the story as it goes on. And we have lots of great guests that help flesh it out as well. But those were really fun to do. And I hope we do more of those soon.
Yay. And on YouTube, you have a series going into its third season, The Hidden Huntington Beach, where you chronicle all the history and people of Huntington.
Which was crazy. That really came about because of COVID. You know, living in Huntington Beach as long as I had, and I'd written so much about it, and I was looking for something to do because there was some TV work I was going to do that COVID kind of nixed, right? And the city was very open to it, so they became partners with it. We're going into our fourth season now, about 40 episodes. And yeah, it airs on, they have a YouTube channel, it's on channel, the city channel in Huntington. It's on like all the time, which is really cool because people in the city today, everybody knows that show, it seems. Anywhere I go in Huntington.
Is it Cox?
No, I forget what the city
Time
channel
Warner?
is. Might be Spectrum. I'm not sure. I can let you know. But it's on, again, it's available online. And in the city, everybody has really enjoyed it and embraced it. And it's been a super fun project. And it's forced me, I thought I knew Huntington Beach. And I did, I guess, to a degree. But when you're forced to go out and shoot 20, you know what it's like when you've got to do new episodes. It pushes you to go find interesting stories and subject matter. And so I've learned a ton. I like on-air storytelling. To me, this is all storytelling, whether it's on TV or writing books, whatever. It's all about telling a story. And that's what all advertising was. I really believe that's my personal purpose here on this planet, is to tell stories. And in writing commercials, it was telling 30-second stories and 60-second stories. It had to sell something, but it was still stories. They all had a beginning, a middle, and an end, you know? And so for me, whatever I do, whether it's standing in front of a class or going on TV or writing a book, it's all about enhancing the idea of storytelling and why that matters and how that can enhance your life.
Well, I want you to move on to Laguna Beach next because we need more stories. So many cool things happened in Laguna.
John Steinbeck lived and wrote in Laguna Beach. I mean, Laguna Beach at Bluebird Canyon, there are bungalows that were part of the very first Olympic Village in 1932 in Los Angeles. A realtor bought those bungalows and moved them up there. It's why the streets are named after Buster Crabbe and you know, other Olympians of that era. So yeah, Laguna's got, I mean, obviously
tons of history,
remarkable history.
Well, and one of my past guests, Greer Wilder, she's from Greer's OC. Do you know Greer?
Yeah. Oh, I know of, but we haven't
know of her. She did a book called Born in OC, and it's basically chronicling all of the innovations that came out of Orange County. I got to put you guys together.
I love that, but that's a kindred spirit who appreciates things that took place here and wants to illuminate them in a way. And I love projects like that.
Yeah. So we got to mention you are the father of two awesome kids, Charlie and Claire. So clearly they had to go on road trips when they were kids. I don't think they had a choice about that. But do they read your books? Do your kids read your books?
I think, when you're in a household where they're being written, you're sort of living them as they come together. I mean, I don't read my books because I know what's in it. You know what I mean? And there, with them, it was the same thing. They would hear it as it came together. I think what was interesting about Charlie is that he's 28. He's written 5 books.
Oh my gosh.
So he watched the process and then applied it.
Wow.
And didn't let me meddle as I would absolutely have done because I'm that person. He would keep it away from me till the book was done, and I'd see it when it was published. But he was like my shadow with all those book projects. And so when he started writing his own books, that blew my mind because his books are amazing.
Yay.
He was going to USC, and he wrote a book about the cultural history of USC, while he was there.
Wow.
And Claire today makes her living as a writer as well. So I'm blown away that these kids sort of osmosed how to write, why it matters, and how you can, incorporate it into your life like that. I never expected that in a million years.
Good job, Dad. Good job. Well, with all of that under your belt, is there a goal that you have yet to reach?
Professionally, I think the one thing, I'm not a fiction writer. I've tried, but I just don't seem to have that thing. But one literary goal I have is sort of the next best thing is what's called a roman à clé, which is French for a novel with a key. Basically, we would write about your life, but fictionalize it, change names and places to give you some creative latitude to make it a little bit more interesting. And there are some stories from life of when I was a teenager that I've started mapping out now how to take those stories, including like working with John Cheever, and turn it into a roman à clé where it's sort of fictional, but still based on very real things. That's as close as I think as I'll get to fiction, but I feel like I need to scratch that itch as a writer to at least create something that is not so nonfiction and so locked into fact as like so many things that I write.
Is there an artist that you would love to work with, like your dream artist, if you could write a memoir with someone?
Well, I mean, obviously, if I had my druthers, it would be with Mick Jagger, because Keith Richards already wrote a memoir. Or Bob Dylan would be the other one. Now, he wrote a brilliant memoir called Chronicles. He's a terrific writer and wrote, I thought a spectacular, highly recommended memoir. But there's other people too. I mean, Stevie Nicks, I would love to wait till she's 90 and do that because I think her life has been incredible. But that's it. You never know. I never expected to meet Tyrus and be working on his second book with him now. So I like the fact that sometimes things find you as opposed to going out and chasing them. Yep. But if I had one, if you said pick one, it would definitely be Mick Jagger.
All right, we'll work on that for you. We'll
Please
call
do. Thank you. You must know somebody.
Just let him know. So nice having you. Thank you so much for being here, Chris.
Thank you for one of the more thoughtful interviews I've ever had. This really was a pleasure.
Yay.
You're so prepared and so insightful, so thank you.
Well, you're part of the Delphines Circle family now, so.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Delphines Circle. Don't forget to subscribe. It's free and it will help us keep these incredible interviews coming your way. Here are 2 other episodes you may enjoy. I'm Delphine. Welcome to my circle.